What is the one human trait that AI cannot replicate? I'm curious in the type of task that AI cannot perform but people can. Yes, but why? It is, in fact, a really good question, and it is likely the most important question at the moment. In other words, what is AI capable of and what is it not? As it happens, AI is currently incapable of performing all of our tasks. Sometimes, though, it could perform 20% of our work 1,000 times better, depending on what we do. It may be able to perform 50% of a person's work 1,000 times better for some people, but it cannot perform all of a job. Thus, this is the most important finding. To help us with that 20%, 40%, or 50%, we should all use AI to automate tasks and become assistants. You know, Jensen, is AI going to take your job? People ask me. And I tell them that's not at all. Your job will be taken by the individual who automates that 20% or 50% using AI. It appears that Nvidia has made some really amazing moves in the last 2 or 3 weeks. You experienced a significant setback. You know, we were worried about the balance between supply and demand for black oil chips last quarter. Could they fulfill the demand? Would revenue decline as a result? Had we raised our expectations for revenue too much? We've kind of gone backwards and are now confronting what appears to be the same concern once more. Will the capital expenditures be available to meet the revenue and multiple expectations? As Tim mentioned, it does seem like you have to keep spending if you want to stay in the game. Therefore, I would assume that the other hyperscalers are still spending. All of these are basically relying on this to support the multiples they have now obtained and to expand their margins. I am not certain that next week will be the quote-unquote asterisk moment of truth, simply because I believe that some of the multiples expectations, for instance, Google or Amazon, reflect that expectations have somewhat retreated. Therefore, I do believe that, from one Mag 7 member to another, the earnings multiples and expectations show that there might be a chance to trade here before earnings. We gave it a lot of thought as we considered the topic we would discuss on the show today. We hold planning meetings, in fact. We discussed this for a long time. Yes, we'd have been getting together since Wednesday to discuss this in a constructive way. The main question, in my opinion, regarding big tech results is whether or not they support the main idea that has been propelling the tech industry, which is the resilience of the AI market. Therefore, is it possible for us to separate it? Can we distinguish between Nvidia's performance and the statements made by Amazon, Alphabet, and Microsoft, or are they intrinsically linked? They're all Nvidia customers, aren't they? Yes, that's a nice place to be. Currently, Nvidia holds 80 to 85% of the market. The company that is making money right now, not in the future, is Nvidia. Is it possible to separate them? Yes, that is what you have done. Nvidia has risen 185%, 186%, and 200%. None of the others are. Thus, we've already split them off. However, don't you think this is a little bit priced to perfection? Additionally, I have been optimistic about the market and Nvidia. Nvidia was missed. Around the 110 level, I became overly affectionate and believed it would return. That ship has sailed. I'm going to hold off on purchasing the next leg of Nvidia for myself until we launch a asterisk market on turmoil asterisk special. Grow cheeky. Yes, exactly, it is true. But what do we actually have when you think about it? The earnings bar has been decreased. I believe that the majority of these businesses can surpass them. However, based on their performance thus far this year, I believe they need a break. Many of these hyperscalers remark, "We're going to cut back on spending. We don't expect the expenditure to proceed as quickly as it has recently." Mike, what's going on with this trade? Is it a negative or a good, as Tim suggests? Overall, if you're referring to Amazon, Microsoft, and the like, this is good for the hyperscalers. Well, I suppose that might work out for them. First of all, I somewhat refute the idea that they aren't currently participants because, of course, AWS and Azure are already relevant goods for these companies. We cannot overlook that. Have they advanced AI to the point that, in my opinion, everyone is expecting? In my opinion, consumers are effectively losing the distinction between their cloud solutions, which, let's face it, rely significantly on Nvidia GPUs. I mean, we were spending a lot of money to essentially have access to all of that, and I have been a long-time AWS member. Therefore, you need to distinguish it from an AI product that is familiar to the typical consumer, such as ChatGPT. I believe that's what everyone believes would happen as a result of everything. But they fail to realize that these businesses are already making billions of dollars from their cloud stack, which is a major source of funding for Nvidia. Additionally, the consumer side of things might not be the major beneficiary. I mean, it might be the business part of things, which isn't necessarily being discussed right now. However, Tim, if the hyperscalers decide, we're not going to spend as much, that would be a good thing for them and a bad thing for Nvidia. Yes, indeed, I believe that a certain dynamic has fueled Nvidia's earnings and enabled the street to make some educated guesses about what the company will do in the upcoming quarter. However, because Google is somewhat stuck in the center of this, I do believe it does come back, and I believe they are a fantastic example. I believe we want to know the return on investment for their investment. Like everyone else, they are curious about the amount spent. We are interested in the return on investment. Then you return to their primary consumer business, which is their primary search, which is undoubtedly a dynamic that is on the verge of being endangered, but is still anticipated to expand. The EPS line is expected to climb by about 13.5%, and I believe the street is at a consensus of 12.4%. Nevertheless, given the numerous references to itself, I believe Google should be the most defensive of all these identities. You see, if this stock is trading at 20 times the EPS, which is where the street is, it is a $200 stock. And I find that to be an intriguing aspect. How has the positioning been going into this crucial earnings week, Michael? Optimistic. Actually, I'm bullish on almost all of them. Yes, exactly. First of all, let's take a look. Nvidia exchanged 4.7 million contracts. What? Today, there are more than 55 million contracts, including index and ETF options. However, calls are significantly outnumbering puts in each of these names. It's likely that there will be twice as many bets on the upside. I believe it's more a matter of being cautious about how far the stocks have come, with Nvidia perhaps being the most prominent example. After all, the multiple we attach to this depends somewhat on your expectations for their performance. However, for the entire year 2025, I'm thinking about maybe $4 per share. Thus, we will reach 35 times in the upcoming year. Given that it represents an increase of over 40% annually, it doesn't seem too costly. Therefore, the PEG ratio is less than 1. That's growth at a fair price, I mean. How about semis? As we previously said, Nvidia is displacing Apple at the top of the market capitalization hierarchy. Although it has undoubtedly had an amazing run, not all of the stocks in this market are Nvidia. How do you evaluate the semifinals? This is the one instance when I firmly believe you have witnessed leadership truly fracturing or splitting, and this has been the case throughout the spring, summer, and fall. We are aware of the Nvidia chart's excellence. We are aware of Broadcom's excellence. AMD is where? Lam Research is where? Where is ASML? Samsung, where are you? In my opinion, it's the weakest at the core and the faintest of what is regarded as leadership. Here, only a quarter of the semis are above their 200-day moving average. For the following 4 to 6 weeks, semis do provide some decent seasonality. If you had a bounce, I believe I would be more likely to fade it in the semifinals rather than chase it. I questioned you about Berkshire selling Apple before, so now I'll ask you about Nvidia's current status and its participation in the Dow, as well as your thoughts on it in light of your observations over the years. Indeed, it is evident that on some level, Intel's prior inclusion and